Flight attendant targets black triplet sisters moments later. CEO mom fires her. First class is for first-class passengers only. I'm going to have to ask you three to return to your assigned seats in economy. Actually, we are first-class passengers, and I believe you know that since you checked our boarding passes 20 minutes ago. The tension in the first-class cabin was thick enough to cut with a knife. Diana Foster stood tall, her professional black blazer and crisp white blouse a stark contrast to the flight attendant's increasingly reddening face. Behind Diana, her identical triplet daughters, Zora, Maya, and Angela, sat quietly in their first-class seats, their expressions a mixture of embarrassment and simmering anger. The flight attendant, whose name tag read Patricia, crossed her arms defensively. There must have been a mistake at check-in. We don't usually have. I mean, these seats are premium-priced. Diana's voice remained steady, but her eyes narrowed. I'm well aware of the price. I purchased these tickets myself, using the same airline loyalty account I've held for the past 15 years. Other passengers had begun to notice the confrontation. An elderly white couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. A businessman pretended to be absorbed in his newspaper. The co-pilot had emerged from the cockpit, sensing trouble. I'm going to need to see your boarding passes again, Patricia insisted, holding out her hand expectantly. Diana glanced at her watch, a vintage Rolex her father had given her when she made partner at her law firm back in '89. I'd like to speak to your supervisor immediately, and I'd like their name and employee number as well. The flight attendant's smile tightened. Ma'am, I'm simply following protocol. No, you're not, Diana interrupted. You're singling out my daughters because they're young black women. You didn't ask to recheck anyone else's boarding pass. This is the third time in 40 minutes you've questioned our presence in first class. The co-pilot stepped forward. Is there a problem here? Yes, Diana said, reaching into her purse and pulling out a business card. My name is Diana Foster, CEO of Meridian Technologies. These are my daughters, and we are all ticketed first-class passengers on this flight. Your flight attendant has repeatedly harassed us since boarding, and I intend to file a formal complaint with your airline's executive office the moment we land. The co-pilot's eyes widened at the business card. Meridian Technologies was a Fortune 500 company and one of the airline's biggest corporate clients. But let's go back to how this all started. It was just 3 hours earlier when the Foster family arrived at O'Hare International Airport for what should have been a routine flight home. Diana Foster checked her watch as she guided her silver Mercedes into the airport parking garage. Chicago's morning traffic had been mercifully light for a Friday in June, giving the Foster women plenty of time to make their flight back to Atlanta. The triplets, recently graduated from their respective colleges, were dozed in the backseat, jet-lagged from a week of college campus visits and family celebrations. Girls, we're here, Diana called, glancing in the rearview mirror at her daughters. At 22, they were identical in appearance but distinct in personality. Zora, the oldest by 3 minutes, adjusted her glasses and was already reaching for her carefully organized travel folder. Maya, the middle triplet, yawned and stretched, her Northwestern University sweatshirt riding up slightly. Angela, the youngest and most fashion-conscious, was checking her reflection in a compact mirror, adjusting her hoop earrings. Mom, remind me again why we had to book such an early flight. Angela groaned, tucking the mirror away. Diana chuckled as she pulled into a parking space. Because your grandmother is throwing that welcome-home dinner tonight, and you know how Josephine Foster gets when people are late to her events. The mention of their grandmother brought smiles to all three young women's faces. Josephine Foster, at 78, was a force of nature, a retired schoolteacher who had raised Diana alone after her husband was killed in Vietnam in 1968. Grandma Jo would send out a search party if we missed that dinner, Maya said, grabbing her backpack. Zora nodded, already scrolling through her phone. The flight's on time, at least. We should be back in Atlanta by 2 p.m., plenty of time to help Grandma with dinner prep. Diana smiled at her daughters with quiet pride. This past week had been special, a celebration of their college graduations and a chance to visit potential graduate schools together. Zora had received scholarship offers for medical school at both Emory and Johns Hopkins. Maya was considering law school, following in Diana's early footsteps before she'd pivoted to business. Angela had interviews lined up with several fashion magazines and design houses in Atlanta and New York. The Foster women collected their luggage and made their way to the terminal, a practiced routine after years of family travel. Diana had raised her daughters to be prepared, confident, and unfailingly polite, qualities she'd needed in abundance while building her tech company from the ground up as a single mother. At check-in, the airline representative smiled brightly. "Good morning, Ms. Foster. We have you and your daughters in first class to Atlanta. Will you be needing assistance with anything today?" "No, thank you, we're fine," Diana replied, accepting their boarding passes. They moved through security with the efficiency of experienced travelers. Once past the checkpoint, they stopped at a cafe for coffee and breakfast. "I still can't believe Northwestern's offer," Maya said, stirring cream into her coffee. "Full scholarship plus stipend." "You earned it," Diana said simply. "All of you did. Your father would be so proud." A brief silence fell at the mention of Robert Foster. He had died when the girls were just 5 years old, a heart attack at 40 that had left Diana a widow with 3 small children and a fledgling tech consultancy barely staying afloat. "I was thinking about Dad yesterday," Zora said quietly. "When we were at the Museum of Science and Industry. Remember how he used to take us there when we'd visit Chicago?" Diana nodded, her eyes soft with memory. "He loved that space exhibit, would spend hours explaining the lunar module to you three." "I still have that moon rock keychain he bought me," Angela added. "It's my good luck charm for interviews." Their reminiscing was interrupted by the boarding announcement for their flight. As executive platinum members, they were among the first called to board. The gate agent scanned their passes with a smile. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Foster, ladies." The 4 women made their way down the jetway, Diana leading the way with her carry-on rolling behind her. They found their seats in the first-class cabin, Diana and Zora in one row, Maya and Angela directly behind them. "Window or aisle, Zoe?" Diana asked her oldest. "Window, please," Zora replied, sliding in with her book already in hand. They settled in comfortably, stowing their bags and getting situated for the 2-hour flight. Diana noticed the flight attendant, Patricia, greeting passengers as they boarded, offering to hang up jackets and take drink orders. When Patricia reached their row, her smile faltered slightly. "Good morning," she said, her tone noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous passengers. "Good morning," Diana replied pleasantly, not thinking much of it. "Can I see your boarding passes, please?" Patricia asked. Diana raised an eyebrow. They'd already had their passes scanned at the gate, of course, but she reached into her purse and produced all 4. "Is there a problem?" Patricia examined the passes with unusual scrutiny. "No, everything seems to be in order," she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. She handed them back without offering to take their jackets or drink orders as she had for other first-class passengers. Diana exchanged a glance with Zora, who had noticed the difference in treatment as well. Neither said anything. A lifetime of similar small indignities had taught them when to pick their battles. The cabin filled as more passengers boarded. Patricia returned to take drink orders from the other first-class passengers but bypassed the Foster women. After she'd served everyone else, Diana pressed the call button. Patricia returned, her expression tight. "Yes. We haven't had a chance to order our pre-flight beverages," Diana said pleasantly. "Of course," Patricia replied, though her tone suggested it was an imposition. "What would you like?" They placed their orders, and Patricia left to fetch their drinks. When she returned, she practically placed Diana's sparkling water on the armrest rather than handing it to her properly. "Thank you," Diana said, maintaining her composure. For the next 20 minutes, Diana observed as Patricia warmly interacted with the other first-class passengers while practically ignoring her family. When Maya asked for a blanket, Patricia directed her to look in the overhead compartment herself, despite having retrieved blankets for an elderly white couple just moments before. Angela exclaimed, spotting her as well. "You know your grandmother," Diana said with a smile. "She's never been patient." When they disembarked, Patricia was nowhere to be seen, but a woman in an airline management uniform was waiting at the gate alongside Captain Reynolds. "Ms. Foster," the woman said, stepping forward with an extended hand. "I'm Catherine Bell, Chief of In-Flight Services for the airline. Captain Reynolds informed me about what happened on today's flight, and I wanted to speak with you personally." "Of course," Diana replied, shaking her hand. "These are my daughters, Zora, Maya, and Angela." Catherine Bell nodded respectfully to the young women. "I want to extend our sincerest apologies for your experience today. What you described is completely contrary to our values and policies." "I appreciate that," Diana said, "but I'm more interested in hearing what actions you plan to take to prevent similar incidents in the future." "Absolutely," Catherine agreed. "If you have a few minutes, I'd like to discuss that with you." Diana glanced at her mother and daughters, who were now embracing by the gate. "Girls, why don't you go with Grandma Jo? I'll meet you at baggage claim in a few minutes." Josephine Foster approached, her keen eyes taking in the situation immediately. At 78, she moved a bit more slowly than she once had, but her mind was as sharp as ever. Everything all right, Diana? She asked, her voice carrying the gentle lilt of her Georgia upbringing. Just fine, Mama. I need to speak with Miss Bell here for a moment. Could you take the girls to baggage claim? I won't be long. Josephine looked from Diana to Catherine Bell with the assessing gaze that had intimidated generations of schoolchildren. Take your time, daughter. We'll be waiting. She ushered her granddaughters away, already asking them about their trip. Diana turned back to Catherine Bell. Shall we? They moved to a quiet corner of the gate area, joined by Captain Reynolds. Ms. Foster, I've already reviewed the incident with Captain Reynolds and our gate agents, Catherine began. What happened today was a clear violation of our anti-discrimination policies. Diana nodded but remained silent, waiting for Catherine to continue. I've also spoken with several passengers who witnessed the interaction, Catherine added. Their accounts corroborate what Captain Reynolds reported. And what actions do you plan to take? Diana asked directly. Patricia Winters has been removed from service pending a full investigation, Catherine replied. Based on the information I already have, I don't anticipate she'll be returning to a customer-facing role with our airline. Diana considered this. I'm not interested in seeing someone lose their livelihood, Ms. Bell. What I would like to see is better training for your staff. I completely agree, Catherine said, and that's the other reason I wanted to speak with you. Given your position at Meridian Technologies, I wonder if you might be willing to consult with us on improving our diversity training programs. Diana was surprised by the request. That's not exactly Meridian's area of expertise. We're a cybersecurity company. But you've been recognized for your inclusive corporate culture, Catherine pointed out. Meridian has won awards for its diversity initiatives. And frankly, Ms. Foster, I think our employees would benefit from hearing directly from someone of your stature about the impact of these seemingly small incidents. Captain Reynolds added, The airline industry has been slow to change in some ways, Ms. Foster. Having someone like you share your perspective could make a real difference. Diana considered the proposal. It wasn't what she had expected, but perhaps it was an opportunity to create more meaningful change than simply filing a complaint. I'd need to think about it, she said finally, and discuss it with my team at Meridian. Of course, Catherine handed her a business card. Please take some time to consider it, and regardless of your decision on that front, I want to assure you that we're taking the incident very seriously. They parted amicably, and Diana made her way to baggage claim where her mother and daughters were waiting with their luggage already collected. Everything settled? Josephine asked as Diana approached. For now, Diana replied. She'd fill her mother in on the details later when the girls weren't listening. Josephine nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Well then, let's get home. I've got a pot of gumbo that's been simmering since this morning, and your favorite sweet potato pie cooling on the windowsill. The Foster women made their way to the parking garage where Josephine's well-maintained 1989 Cadillac was waiting. As they loaded their luggage into the trunk, Diana felt a surge of gratitude for her family, for her wise, steadfast mother who had shown her how to navigate a world that wasn't always welcoming, and for her brilliant daughters who were forging their own paths with courage and determination. The drive to Josephine's house in the historic West End neighborhood of Atlanta was filled with the triplets' animated accounts of their Chicago adventures. The Victorian home where Josephine had lived for 40 years came into view, its sunny yellow exterior and wraparound porch as welcoming as ever. Home sweet home, Josephine announced as they pulled into the driveway. Once inside, the familiar sense of Josephine's cooking enveloped them. The house was exactly as Diana remembered from her own childhood, filled with books, family photographs, and the collection of African art Josephine had begun in the 1970s. While the girls took their bags upstairs to their usual rooms, Diana followed her mother into the kitchen. Now tell me what really happened on that plane, Josephine said as she stirred her gumbo. Diana sighed and leaned against the counter. Same old story, Mama. Flight attendant didn't believe 3 young black women belonged in first class. Josephine shook her head. Some things change, some things stay the same. She tasted the gumbo, added a pinch of salt. How did my granddaughters handle it? With dignity, Diana assured her. Just like you taught us. Josephine nodded approvingly. And the airline? Diana explained about her conversations with the captain and Catherine Bell. They've offered me a consulting role to help improve their diversity training. Josephine considered this as she reached for the hot sauce. That could be an opportunity, or it could be them trying to save face with a valuable customer. That's what I'm trying to figure out, Diana admitted. Well, sleep on it, Josephine advised. Now call those girls down for dinner. Food's ready, and I want to hear all about those college campuses they visited. Dinner was a joyous affair, with Josephine insisting on hearing every detail of their Chicago trip. The triplets took turns sharing stories, sometimes finishing each other's sentences in the way that had fascinated Diana since they were toddlers. And then the Northwestern tour guide realized we were the Foster triplets, Maya was saying. Apparently, our synchronized swimming video from sophomore year is still legendary on campus. Lord, I remember when you three decided to take up synchronized swimming, Josephine laughed. Diana nearly had a heart attack when you announced you were joining the team. Because none of them could swim, Diana protested, laughing at the memory. They decided to join the synchronized swimming team before they even knew how to tread water. But we learned, Zora pointed out, and we got pretty good. State champions our senior year, Angela added proudly. That's because you Foster women don't quit, Josephine said, her voice warm with pride. Not when things get hard, not when people underestimate you. After dinner, while the triplets cleaned the kitchen, another long-standing Foster tradition, whoever doesn't cook cleans, Diana and Josephine moved to the porch with cups of coffee. So, when are you going to tell them? Josephine asked after a comfortable silence. Diana didn't pretend not to understand. After the weekend, I think, let them enjoy being home first. Josephine nodded. They're going to have opinions, you know. When don't they? Diana smiled. But this is my decision. Is it the right one? Josephine asked, direct as always. Diana looked out at the garden where her daughters had played as children. I think so, Mama. 25 years building Meridian is enough. It's time for something new. Well, Josephine said, patting Diana's hand. Whatever you decide, you know I'm behind you. Always have been. The weekend passed in a blur of family time, home-cooked meals, and catching up with old friends who stopped by to congratulate the triplets on their graduations. Diana kept her phone largely off, enjoying the rare break from the constant demands of running a major corporation. On Sunday evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk, Diana decided it was time. Girls, there's something I need to tell you, she began. All three turned to look at her, instantly alert to the serious tone in her voice. Is everything okay, Mom? Zora asked, always the first to worry. Everything's fine, Diana assured them. In fact, better than fine, I've made a decision and I wanted to share it with you three first. She took a deep breath. I'm stepping down as CEO of Meridian Technologies. Three identical expressions of shock greeted her announcement. What? Why? Maya asked, the lawyer in training already looking for reasoning. Mom, is this because of what happened on the plane? Angela demanded. Because if those airline people made you feel like you need to, Diana held up a hand. This has nothing to do with the incident on the plane. I've been considering this move for over a year now. She smiled at their concerned faces. I'm not retiring if that's what you're worried about. I'm just ready for a new challenge. But you built Meridian from nothing, Zora said. It's your life's work. It's a significant part of my life's work, Diana corrected gently. But you three are my greatest achievement. She looked at each of her daughters in turn. And now that you're launching your own careers, I find myself thinking about what I want the next chapter of my life to look like. So what will you do? Maya asked. Diana smiled. Actually, I'm considering something in line with what Catherine Bell proposed. Not specifically for the airline, but perhaps broader consulting work focused on helping companies create more inclusive cultures. She shrugged lightly. I've learned a few things in 25 years as a black woman CEO. Might be time to share that knowledge more widely. That sounds amazing, Mom, Zora said, her initial shock giving way to thoughtful consideration. But is Marcus ready to take over Meridian? Maya asked, referring to Diana's longtime COO. More than ready, Diana confirmed. The transition plan has been in the works for months. The board approved it last week. She took another sip of her lemonade. I'll stay on as chairwoman of the board, but Marcus will handle the day-to-day operations as CEO. Wow, Angela said. This is big. It is, Diana agreed. But it feels right. And speaking of new beginnings, don't you three have some decisions to finalize? The conversation shifted to the triplets' plans. Zora had decided to accept Johns Hopkins' offer for medical school, while Maya was leaning toward Georgetown Law. Angela had 2 job offers from fashion magazines, but was considering starting her own small design business instead. Whatever you decide, Diana told them, you have my support, just as you've supported me all these years. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Diana sat alone on the porch, contemplating the changes ahead. Her phone buzzed with an email notification, Catherine Bell following up about the consulting proposal. Diana began to compose a response, suggesting a meeting to discuss not just training for the airline, but a more comprehensive approach to creating an inclusive culture throughout the company. As she typed, she felt a sense of purpose and excitement that had been missing in recent months. The incident on the plane, unpleasant as it had been, had clarified something for her. After years of breaking barriers and proving herself in corporate boardrooms, perhaps her most meaningful contribution now would be to help create spaces where others wouldn't have to face the same obstacles. The next morning, Diana woke early, as was her habit. She found her mother already in the kitchen, making biscuits from scratch just as she had done every Monday morning for as long as Diana could remember. "Morning, Mama," Diana said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from the percolator, another of Josephine's unchanging traditions. She refused to switch to a modern coffee maker, insisting nothing tasted as good as percolator coffee. "Morning, baby," Josephine replied, her hands expertly shaping biscuit dough. "Sleep well." "Better than I have in months," Diana admitted. "I think I made the right decision." "I know you did," Josephine said with the certainty that had guided Diana all her life. They worked together in comfortable silence, Diana frying bacon while Josephine slid the biscuits into the oven. It was a dance they'd performed countless times over the decades. "I have a meeting with the airline executive today," Diana mentioned as she turned the bacon. Josephine responded. "And what are you going to tell her?" "That I'm interested in working with them, but not just on a one-time training session. I want to help them create real, lasting change in their corporate culture." Josephine nodded approvingly. "Starting with that flight attendant?" Diana considered this. "Actually, I'm going to suggest they don't fire her." Josephine's eyebrows shot up. "Now that I didn't expect." "Firing her doesn't solve the underlying problem," Diana explained. "It just removes one symptom. I'm going to suggest a different approach, have her work directly with their diversity and inclusion team, make her part of the solution." Josephine hummed thoughtfully as she checked on the biscuits. "That's either very wise or very foolish. I'm not sure which yet," Diana laughed. "Well, when you figure it out, let me know." The triplets eventually made their way downstairs, drawn by the smell of Josephine's cooking. They ate breakfast together, discussing their plans for the day. Diana had her meeting with Catherine Bell, while the girls were planning to meet up with old friends from high school. After breakfast, Diana dressed carefully for her meeting, choosing a tailored navy suit that projected authority without being intimidating. As she fastened her mother's pearls around her neck, she thought about how far she had come from the nervous young widow trying to run a small tech consultancy while raising 3 little girls. She drove her mother's Cadillac to the airline's Atlanta headquarters, arriving precisely 5 minutes early for her meeting. The receptionist led her to a conference room where Catherine Bell was waiting, along with 2 other executives. "Ms. Foster, thank you for coming," Catherine greeted her. "Let me introduce you to James Wilson, our Chief Operating Officer, and Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who heads our employee development programs." After introductions and small talk, they got down to business. "I've given your proposal some thought," Diana began. "And I am interested in working with your airline, but not in the limited capacity we discussed at the airport." She outlined her vision, not just a training session, but a comprehensive assessment of their corporate culture and practices, followed by targeted interventions at multiple levels of the organization. "What you experienced on that flight wasn't an isolated incident," Diana explained. "It was a symptom of broader issues that training alone won't fix." The executives exchanged glances. "That's more extensive than what we had in mind," James Wilson admitted. "It is," Diana agreed, "but if you're serious about creating meaningful change, that's what it will take." "And what about the flight attendant involved in the incident?" Catherine asked. "Our standard procedure would be termination." "Actually, I'd like to propose something different," Diana said, explaining her idea to make Patricia part of the solution rather than simply removing her from the equation. Dr. Rodriguez leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "That's an unusual approach, Ms. Foster. What makes you think it would be effective?" "Because people can change when given the opportunity to learn from their mistakes," Diana said simply. 25 years in business has taught me that." The meeting continued for over an hour, with Diana addressing their questions and concerns. By the end, they had the outline of an agreement. Meridian Technologies would partner with the airline on a 6-month diversity and inclusion initiative, with Diana personally involved as a consultant once she stepped down as CEO. As they wrapped up, Catherine Bell walked Diana to the elevator. "I have to admit, this isn't what I expected when I approached you at the airport." Diana smiled. "Sometimes the most difficult moments lead to unexpected opportunities." "Indeed," Catherine agreed. "By the way, I checked our records after our conversation on Friday. Your family has flown over 400,000 miles with us in the past 5 years alone." "We travel a lot for business and pleasure," Diana acknowledged. Which makes what happened even more embarrassing for us, Catherine said. You're exactly the kind of loyal customer we should be treating like royalty. Diana shook her head. That's not the point, Ms. Bell. Every passenger deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how many miles they've flown or what class they're seated in. Catherine nodded thoughtfully. You're right, of course, and that's precisely why we need your perspective. The elevator arrived and Diana stepped in. I'll have my office send over the formal proposal tomorrow. We'll look forward to it, Catherine replied as the doors closed. Diana left the building feeling energized. The consulting work would be challenging, certainly, but also deeply meaningful, and it would allow her more flexibility to support her daughters as they embarked on their own careers. When she returned to her mother's house, she found Josephine in the garden, tending to her prized roses. Despite the June heat, her mother seemed tireless as she carefully pruned each bush. How did it go? Josephine asked without looking up from her task. Better than expected, Diana replied, slipping off her heels to walk barefoot in the grass. They're interested in the broader approach I proposed. Good, Josephine nodded approvingly. And the flight attendant. They're considering my suggestion about keeping her on in a different role. Josephine straightened up, pushing her gardening hat back from her forehead. You know, I've been thinking about what you said this morning, about making her part of the solution. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron. In 40 years of teaching, I saw a lot of people make mistakes. The ones who grew from them were the ones who were held accountable but also given a path to do better. Diana smiled. That's where I got the idea from, Mama. I remembered what you always said about your students. Josephine chuckled. Well, I'm glad some of my wisdom stuck. She gestured toward the house. The girls called. They'll be back for dinner around 6. They want to take us out to celebrate your new venture. Inside, Diana changed into more comfortable clothes and settled on the porch with her laptop to begin drafting the proposal for the airline. As she worked, she reflected on how differently the situation might have played out if she had responded with anger rather than composure on that flight. By the time the triplets returned home, Diana had completed a rough draft of the proposal. She closed her laptop as she heard them coming up the porch steps, their voices overlapping as they discussed their day. Mom. Maya called the first through the door. We made reservations at Marcel for dinner, Grandma's favorite. Fancy, Diana commented, knowing the upscale steakhouse was a special occasion spot for their family. Well, it is a celebration, Zora pointed out. Your new consulting business deserves a proper toast. Diana smiled at her daughter's enthusiasm. It's just a proposal at this point. Nothing's finalized. It will be, Angela said confidently. They'd be crazy not to hire you. Over dinner that evening, Diana watched her family with a full heart, her wise, steadfast mother, her brilliant, compassionate daughters. The incident on the plane already seemed distant, transformed into a catalyst for positive change rather than a source of bitterness. 2 weeks later, Diana was back in Chicago, but under very different circumstances. She stood at the front of a conference room at the airline's training center, facing a group of 30 employees, including Patricia Winters. The Diversity and Inclusion Initiative had been approved, and this was the first workshop, a pilot program that would inform the larger rollout across the company. Patricia sat in the back row, her expression guarded. She had accepted the reassignment to the airline's newly formed inclusion team as an alternative to termination, though Diana suspected it was more out of necessity than genuine interest in the work. Good morning, Diana began. My name is Diana Foster, and for the next 6 months, I'll be working with your company on creating a more inclusive culture. Some of you may know that I was recently CEO of Meridian Technologies, a position I held for 15 years before stepping down to focus on this type of consulting work. She paused, making eye contact with various participants. But my experience as a black woman in corporate America began long before that. And that's part of what I bring to this conversation, 4 decades of navigating spaces that weren't always designed with people like me in mind. As Diana continued her introduction, she noticed Patricia's posture gradually shifting from defensive to attentive. By the time they broke into small groups for the first exercise, Patricia was actively participating, though still quiet compared to her colleagues. During lunch, Diana approached Patricia's table. May I join you? Patricia looked up, surprise evident on her face. Of course, Ms. Foster. Diana sat down across from her. For a moment, neither spoke. Finally, Patricia broke the silence. I want to apologize for my behavior on that flight. It was unprofessional and discriminatory. Diana nodded, accepting the apology. Thank you. Can I ask you something, Patricia? Why did you assume my daughters didn't belong in first class? Patricia flushed, looking down at her plate. I don't know. It was automatic. 3 young black women, Made assumptions, Diana finished for her. We all do it. The question is whether we're willing to examine those assumptions. Patricia nodded slowly. I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day about where those assumptions came from, about what it says about me. She looked up at Diana. I'm 62 years old, Miss Foster. I grew up in a different time in a small town in Georgia. That's not an excuse, but... It's context, Diana acknowledged. I understand that. I'm 58, Patricia. I grew up in Atlanta during integration. I remember when the world was very explicitly divided into white spaces and black spaces. The question is, what do we do with that history? Their conversation continued, moving from the personal to the professional. Patricia's 30 years as a flight attendant, the changes she'd witnessed, her initial reluctance to join the inclusion team, and her growing interest in the work. By the end of the day, Diana saw something shift in Patricia, not a complete transformation, but the beginning of one. A willingness to question long-held beliefs and to consider different perspectives. As the workshop concluded, Patricia approached Diana. Thank you, she said simply, for giving me this chance instead of just having me fired. Everyone deserves the opportunity to grow, Diana replied. What matters is what you do with it. 6 months later, Diana stood in the same conference room, now addressing a much larger group, airline executives from across the country who had gathered to hear the results of the diversity initiative. The data was promising, significant improvements in employee satisfaction scores, particularly among staff of color, and positive feedback from customers about their experiences. In the front row sat her daughters, who had flown in to support her on this milestone day. Behind them was Patricia Winters, now an active and engaged member of the airline's inclusion team. The journey toward true inclusion is ongoing, Diana concluded her presentation. It requires constant vigilance, humility, and a willingness to change. But the benefits to your employees, your customers, and your bottom line are well worth the investment. The applause was enthusiastic. As people came forward to congratulate her, Diana caught sight of Patricia speaking with Zora, Maya, and Angela. The four of them engaged in what appeared to be a friendly, animated conversation. Later, as they left the building together, Angela linked her arm through Diana's. So, Mom, now that this project is wrapping up, what's next for Foster Consulting? Diana smiled at the name her daughters had given her new venture. Actually, I've had inquiries from 3 other major companies. Apparently, word gets around. Of course it does, Maya said proudly. You're Diana Foster. And we're the Foster Triplets, Zora added with a grin. Your secret weapons. Diana laughed, feeling a surge of gratitude for how things had unfolded since that confrontation on the plane a year ago. What had begun as an unpleasant incident had transformed into an opportunity, not just for her second career, but for creating ripples of change that would impact countless travelers and employees. You know what Grandma Jo always says, Diana reminded them as they stepped out into the Chicago sunshine. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the ugliest packages. And as they walked together toward their waiting car, 3 brilliant young women and their mother, all carrying themselves with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you're capable of, Diana knew that her mother, as always, had been right. Thank you for listening. If this story touched you, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments.